Tonight, if you want to turn over to the book of Hebrews, and we'll be talking about several passages from the book. You just want to kind of keep that open, and if you'd like to look at the passages as we go through. We're going to begin Hebrews chapter 4, beginning with verse 14. Before I read that, let me open the sermon by saying, do you know what a priest is? Because we're going to talk about Jesus as the high priest tonight, but we realize that in the new covenant age, all of us as Christians are priests. And so we don't have a separate priesthood within the church made up of special people that are priests that we go to as members, but rather each one of us can stand before or be part of the chain that stands between us, our own sins, and God. And so the priests, and the import of that, we'll look at a lot of passages tonight for a little while, but the import of that is the fact that not only do we not have to go to another priest to have that done, only the high priest, but the other import is under the Old Testament figurative system, only the priest could go into the Holy of Holies. Okay, or excuse me, the holy place. Let me get this right. The regular members were like outside of all that. The priest could go into the holy place, but only the high priest could go into the Holy of Holies in the tabernacle/temple system in the Old Testament. We are now people, we don't have to stand on the outside anymore. Members of the church, as priests, can enter into the holy place. And guess what the holy place is in the new covenant system? The church. Okay? And so there's a lot of parallels that are happening there. We get to work directly for God as priests. We're involved in that sort of work. But enough said about that. Let's get to Jesus. If you understand that part, then it becomes very evident how important it is that we understand that Jesus is that high priest that goes into the Holy of Holies, the holiest of places, which prefigures, of course, heaven itself. You say, well, what about, we can talk about heaven tonight too. But heaven, basically, if you want to look at the reality of the revelation, the heaven is where God is. The unseen God is in heaven. And that's where our high priest gets to go to heaven itself. Well, I'm getting ahead of myself. Hebrews chapter 4, verses 14 and 15. Seeing then that we have a great high priest that is passed into the heavens, Jesus, the Son of God, let us hold fast our profession. For we have not a high priest which cannot be touched with the feeling of our infirmities, but rather was in all points tempted, like as we are, yet without sin. Nearly everything about the high priesthood, Jesus and the high priesthood, is in the book of Hebrews. So if you just read the book. And what is the theme of the book of Hebrews? Very simple. It's the word better. Jesus is better. Better than the angels. Better than the prophets. Better than Moses. Better than all sorts of things. And we're going to take a look tonight at his priesthood, and guess what? It's better. It's a better priesthood. Hebrews 2, verse 17, the latter part, says that he might be a merciful and faithful high priest in things pertaining to God. Things pertaining to God, well, I got to take 2 seconds for that. That's the word holy, something that's special to God. There's work that you can do. I can go out and work on my car. That's not special to God. Okay? I can go out and mow my grass. That's not special to God. The only way that would be special is that maybe if I worked on your car or mowed your grass, if you were sick, that might be special to God. But the things that priests are involved in are things that pertain especially to God. Hebrews 3, verse 1. Wherefore, holy brethren, partakers of the heavenly calling, consider the apostle and high priest of our profession, Christ Jesus. The word apostle comes from two Greek words, and they're kind of part words, stello and apo. Apo, stello. Stello means to send. Apo means out or away. And so an apostle, like when Jesus gave the Great Commission, they were sent out into the world to preach the gospel. Well, why is Jesus called an apostle, capital A, here in this passage? Because he too was sent out of heaven on a mission. And Jesus worked that task and completed it and returned to the heavenly places. Jesus faithfully carried out the work that he had to do, and the great high priesthood shows his superiority over the priesthood of Aaron. And that is one of the big things that the book of Hebrews talks about. 3 times in John, in the book of Revelation, calls the followers of Christ priests or a kingdom of priests. Revelation chapter 1, verse 6, chapter 5, verse 10, chapter 20, and verse 6. Well, let's take a look just for a few minutes tonight at 3 large ideas about Jesus as being our high priest. What was the qualifications for a high priest? Well, one generally understands that one of the qualifications for the high priest is that the high priest would be human, someone from among mankind. And the Hebrews chapter 5 and verse 1. Jesus, therefore, in his pre-existent form, became flesh and dwelt among us. And clearly, one of the reasons why he became flesh is so that he could die. And that being a big part of the puzzle of the scheme of redemption, that he would become flesh and that flesh would die as a sacrifice for us. But the other counterpart of that is he became flesh so that he could be qualified to be a high priest and stand up for us. The Son also partook of the experience of flesh and blood in order to die, win for mankind the victory over physical death. Jesus as a man on earth was driven to prayers accompanied by tears and loud cries, Hebrews 5 and verse 7. Jesus learned obedience through the things that he suffered. And I always point this out every time we talk about that passage. You can learn obedience, and I think, I've learned obedience over the years. Jesus learned it every single time. He was flawless. He learned obedience to the things that he suffered every single time that he suffered. Another qualification of Jesus for his priesthood is that during his trials in the flesh, Jesus had been tempted in every respect. It is wrong to sin. It is not wrong to be tempted. Jesus was tempted in every way imaginable within the scope of the things wherein that we are tempted. Hebrews 4, verse 15, yet without sinning. Jesus did not resort to heavenly means in order to bypass his trials, which he could have done. Satan, in fact, tried to get him to throw himself off of a cliff so that the angels would come down and protect him from injuring himself. Jesus opened himself up and let Satan have his way. And he suffered through the trials and the temptations. It would have been unfair for mankind if Jesus would have kept himself aloof from the things that we suffer and the temptations that we go through. And he did not do that. He went in straightforward, headlong into the temptations that we face, so that we would know that he understands what we're going through. Another qualification for Jesus in the priesthood is that he was divinely appointed by God. As in the case of other high priests, God appointed Jesus as high priest to act on behalf of others in relation to God in the matter of offering gifts and sacrifices. Jesus, in fact, it says in the book of Hebrews, when the high priest goes into the Holy of Holies, he does not go empty-handed. That's paraphrasing, okay? But that's what it means. It means he goes in there, but it says not without something to offer. He doesn't go in empty-handed. He has to have something to offer when he goes into the Holy of Holies. Jesus, as our high priest, had something to offer, something to sacrifice. Jesus did not exalt himself to this position, but rather was appointed. Psalm 110, verse 4, it's recorded that God said to the Son, "You are a priest forever after the order of Melchizedek," which we'll talk about in a minute. Not only is Jesus a high priest, but Peter also, on the day of Pentecost, Acts 2, 29 and 30, says that Jesus is now sitting on the right hand of the throne of God, reigning as king. So he's a priest and a king. I do not have time. It's going to be a separate sermon. But in Zechariah chapter 6, if you want to read that, it's interesting. There is an account of a priest that, the high priest, in the Old Testament that came back to Jerusalem out of Babylonian captivity. And when he came back, God instructed Zerubbabel, I believe, was the one that was instructed, to have him sit on a throne and make a crown and put that crown on top of the head of Joshua, the high priest. And that, my friends, prefigured. Many people believe, even though the scriptures don't say later that actually did prefigure it, but there are a lot of people that feel that that chapter in Zechariah, what was done there, prefigures Joshua, which Jesus' name is Yeshua, the same thing as Joshua, is sitting on the throne as a high priest with a crown on his head, looking like a person who is both a priest and a king. I gotta leave it alone there. We'll have more lessons on that. But notice the superiority of Christ's priesthood. One of the main ideas in Hebrews is that the Aaronic, the priesthood of Aaron, I should say the high priesthood of Aaron, even though it was great, was inferior to the high priesthood given to Jesus. It seemed back then, during the book of Hebrews, that one of the reasons why it was written is because Christians who were Jewish were tempted to return to the old system. And the writer of Hebrews is reminding them that the new system is superior to the old. And they needed to be warned about that, about returning to an inferior priesthood. Jesus was made a priest after the order of Melchizedek. And if you go back and you read about the battles of the 5 kings and Abraham and all that, and they brought back the spoil, and they were giving a tenth of that spoil to God. And what they did was the king of Salem came, who was also a priest of the Most High God. See that prefigure again? And this is in the book of Genesis. And they paid those tithes through, including Abraham, through Melchizedek. So Melchizedek's superiority is based basically on 2 things. Number 1, Melchizedek blessed Abraham. And usually the greater, it points out in the book of Hebrews, the greater blesses the lesser. Melchizedek blessed Abraham. And it was Abraham who paid tithes to the high priest, to God through the high priest of Melchizedek. And it is noting also that priesthood connection. And so it is. Abraham is the person who pays. He's not the person who receives those tithes. And the book of Hebrews also points out that in a figure, Levi and all the tribes of Jacob, through Abraham, paid tithes to Melchizedek. It's a very, very deep thought. Hebrews 7:1 verse 6 and verse 7 as well. And Hebrews 7, verses 2 and verses 4 about the paying of tithes. Melchizedek had a priesthood that was one of a kind. Hebrews 7, verse 3. Those who were high priests in Israel were high priests by physical lineage, first of all. And Melchizedek was far different. How did Melchizedek become a high priest? It's because it says in the book of Genesis, it's simply because God made him one. God made him one directly. How does Jesus become a high priest according to the order of Melchizedek? Because God simply made him a high priest. You are a priest forever after the order of Melchizedek. The word of God, the direct appointment of Jesus. Very interesting. The high priesthood of Aaron changed many times. In fact, we read when Jesus was crucified, there was actually a retired high priest that was on his way out, and there was a new high priest that, for an overlap there, Caiaphas, and also the other high priests that are there on the occasions, they died. They eventually died. All the high priests died, and there had to be a new high priest. Just like we talked about kings this morning, even if you have a perfect king, he doesn't live forever. People die. And that was one of the weaknesses of the old priesthood. But Jesus, Hebrews 7 verse 24 says, he has an unchangeable and continual high priesthood. In verse 25 there, chapter 7 I believe, it says, wherefore he is able also to save them to the uttermost that come to God by him, seeing that he ever lives to make intercession for them. There's not going to be another high priest. There's not going to be a time when we are not able to go to Jesus, or should I say through Jesus, to God, because he is our high priest. Hebrews 7 verse 27, it says, for this he did, high priest of Aaron and his descendants, they had to offer sacrifices. Jesus had to do the same, but it says, for this he did once when he offered up himself. The change in the high priesthood necessitated a change in the law, or a change in the covenant. Hebrews 7 verse 12. In verses 13 and 14 it says, for he of whom these things are spoken pertaineth to another tribe, of which no man gave attendance at the altar, For it is evident that our Lord sprang out of Judah, of which tribe Moses spoke nothing concerning the priesthood. Then in verse 22 of chapter 7, by so much was Jesus made a surety of a better testament. Hebrews 8 verse 6, but now hath he obtained a more excellent ministry, by how much also he is the mediator of a better covenant, which was established upon better promises. Christ is the high priest that foreshadows good things to come. Hebrews 9 verse 11. In our last section tonight, let's know Jesus the high priest and the sacrificial system. It was the duty of the Levitical high priest and the priest to offer sacrifices to God on behalf of the people. Hebrews 5 and verse 1. Since Jesus is to be the high priest, he must also offer a sacrifice. Hebrews 5 and verse 3. The earthly priest offered animals mostly. Think of all the millions and millions of animals that were killed to have their sins pushed forward and not remembered by God for another year, only to have that year expire and have their sins come up in the remembrance of God, and they would have to have that expiation again that pushed those sins forward and made God forget, or not recall, I should say. Not forget is not the right word. Not bring them to mind, not recall their sinfulness. Well, sometimes in the New Testament, Christ as the high priest is mentioned on one hand, as the one making the offering, and on the other hand, and that's Hebrews 9 verse 14, but on the other hand, he is mentioned as the sacrifice. When Abraham went up to Mount Moriah, Genesis 22 verse 7, he said, "Where's the lamb for the burnt offering?" That's what Isaac asked him. Abraham replied, "My son, God will provide himself a lamb for a burnt offering." Then Abraham saw the ram caught in the thicket, in verse 13, and he offered that as a sacrifice. God will provide, and that becomes the basis for our idea of God's providence, that God will take care of us, that God will do what is necessary to complete his promises. And God provided Jesus, who was in one sense an offering, a person offering the sacrifice, and in the other aspect, he was actually the sacrifice himself. Hebrews 10 verse 5 has a very pregnant verse that says that God prepared a body for Jesus. And if you just gloss over that, you don't understand what that means. You need to focus on that for a minute. God made a body so that Jesus could sacrifice himself, could sacrifice that body. Hebrews 10 and verse 10, "By the which will we are sanctified through the offering of the body of Jesus Christ once and for all." The gospel, Jude verse 3 says, it was given once for all, it's delivered once for all. Jesus sacrificed, that perfect sacrifice. It was good once, and the result of that is good forever, once for all. Back in the old days, the old covenant, a red heifer was taken outside the camp and was offered and was completely burned up. Numbers 19 verses 3 through 10, and then Hebrews 13 verse 11. Then in verse 12 of chapter 13 it says, "Wherefore Jesus also, that he might sanctify the people with his own blood, suffered without the gate." I got the chance while I was in Jerusalem to see, as we were walking along the Via Dolorosa, where Jesus supposedly walked, the pathway to the cross. And as we got down the road a little bit, our guide explained that the walls of Jerusalem are now much, much bigger and further apart than they were when Jesus was sacrificed. And as we walked along that way, we came to a pillar of stone, and that's where the old wall was. But we weren't at the crucifixion site yet, because Jesus was not crucified inside the walls of Jerusalem. He was crucified outside of the walls, just like that red heifer was taken outside of the camp to do the sacrificing and to God on that occasion. So we are urged, because of that, in Hebrews 13 verse 13, "Let us go forth therefore unto him outside of the gates, bearing his reproach." We're not to live within the safety and sanctity of the church walls, if you will. Think of it in a spiritual way. We are to go out into the world, just as Jesus suffered outside of the camp. And Jesus still, there's a heavenly service in his priesthood. After his death, resurrection, appearances, and his ascension, he was exalted to the right hand of the throne of the majesty in the heavens. Hebrews 8 verse 1. Jesus, our high priest, has gone unto heaven itself now to appear in the presence of God for us. And that's a quote, Hebrews 9 verses 24. Isaiah 53:12 states that the suffering servant would make intercession for the transgressors, and that squares with Romans 8 and verse 34. A change in the high priesthood from Aaron to Jesus, there was the necessity of a change in the covenant. Jesus is now the mediator of a better covenant. The new covenant would be written in people's hearts and minds. The Old Testament prophecy was that His followers would be volunteers in those days. You're not born into it anymore. You might be born a Jewish person and be, thought of as a Jew and be part of Judaism, but it doesn't happen that way anymore. We are all volunteers. We are Christians because we want to be. It says in Hebrews 10, verse 16 and 17, that this new covenant would be written in our hearts and in our minds, not on tables of stone, 2 Corinthians chapter 2, but in our hearts and our minds. And, here's the quote, and their sins and their iniquities will I remember or recall no more. Christ's high priesthood has opened up the way of access for Christians to come into the very presence of God. That's confusing to me. And I don't have the complete answer for that. But I know that Jesus said, I'm going to prepare a place for you. And when I come back, I'm going to take you where that you may be where I have been. At the same time, there are prophecies that the wonderful city of God that is reserved in heaven for you will be coming down out of heaven. There are prophecies that are like that. So I don't know. It's a very spiritual thing. I don't know what the ultimate fulfillment of that's going to be. Are the streets of gold going to be pure gold, like literal gold? Or is there going to be gates? The gates that open, there's 12 gates, right? Okay. And each gate is made out of one pearl. Try to wrap your head around that. That's a big pearl, okay? And it's a big oyster too, isn't it? Okay? Are all these things literal? Are they figurative? I don't have the answer for some of that, but I know that wonderful things are in store for us. Ephesians chapter 2 and verse 18. For through him we both have access, both, meaning Jews and Gentiles, we both have access by one Spirit unto the Father. And then going back to Hebrews chapter 10, verses 19 and 20. Having therefore, brethren, boldness to enter into the holiest by the blood of Jesus, by a new and living way, which he has consecrated for us through the veil, that is to say, his flesh. And so, because of that, Hebrews 10 and verse 22, the important passage, one of those grand conclusions in the book of Hebrews, let us draw near with a true heart in full assurance of faith, having our hearts sprinkled from an evil conscience and our bodies washed with pure water. Jesus lives to make intercession for us, but he also left us an example to walk in his footsteps. And these are the final thoughts that we want to take a look at tonight. That race that he ran, he was triumphant. He crossed the finish line. We too. I don't have to cross the finish line before you. In fact, for some of you, I know I wouldn't cross the finish line before you. All I have to do is cross the finish line, right? That's what our job is, to follow in the steps of Jesus, to run the race. It's not a sprint, by the way. It's an endurance race. If anybody is in track or has been in track, it's making that slow progress and being able to keep on going until we can cross that finish line. Wherefore, and this is going to be Hebrews 4 and verse 16. It says, wherefore, oh no, that's got to be Hebrews chapter 12. Wherefore, seeing we also are compassed about with so great a cloud of witnesses, let us lay aside every weight and the sin which does so easily beset us, and let us run with patience or endurance the race that is set before us, looking to Jesus, the author and finisher of our faith, who, for the joy that was set before him, endured the cross, despising the shame, and is set down at the right hand of the throne of God. Final thoughts tonight, Hebrews 4, verse 16. Let us therefore come boldly unto the throne of grace, that we may obtain mercy and find grace to help in time of need. No matter what we're going through, we have a high priest. He understands, He's paved the way for us. He offers grace to us. Because of his sacrifice, we can be saved. We can stand before God in his direct presence when all this is over. We will see God face to face, and we will be saved, and we will be able to exist with him throughout eternity. These are the great promises, and part of that has to do with the superior, better high priesthood that Jesus has been appointed to. I hope that you enjoyed the lesson tonight. There's a lot of other stuff that we could look at, but the time is gone, and I appreciate you trying to think and follow all of this. We just took a panoramic view of Hebrews. There's a lot of good stuff in there. We went through, sometimes when you go to the museum, you can't see it all in one day. Try to see all of Smithsonian in one day. I haven't been there, but I've heard it takes a week, and you still don't see the whole thing. And so if you're going to see it in one day, you have to see it surgically. You have to see it here, 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 here. That's what we did tonight in the book of Hebrews. We didn't see it all, but we just took a little view of some of the things, kind of picking them out of that book. If somebody does need to come forward, we always offer that opportunity in public. And to become a Christian, we're ready to help you with that. That's part of our ministry. And I say our ministry, I mean everybody, every Christian in here. This is part of what we do. We're ready to take the confession and baptize people into Christ tonight. If you need to come forward, prayers at the church or whatever, we give you that opportunity right now while we stand and sing.